Hello there. It's time for Most Things Kenobi. Shouldn't it be All Things Kenobi?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Most Things Kenobi, a podcast about Obi-Wan Kenobi and all things Star Wars. I'm your host, Leanne.
And I'm your host, Lauren.
And this week, we're going to talk about the overarching theme of leadership, but within the Star Wars world, because there are a number of leaders in all of the different Star Wars media, right? Some we can think of right off the top of our head, and some that may not be so obvious, but have traits of a leader, and it spans from the prequels all the way to the sequels and everything in between, including comics. I mean, we're not going to have that kind of time to go through all of them, but I do have notes on how we're going to go through this.
Yes, you want to give a background or a caveat of why?
Sure.
Why we are, not me, you are qualified to have this conversation.
Oh, I'm not qualified.
I mean, you more qualified than I am.
Well, all of this is, okay, so I guess in my personal life, I've attended leadership conferences where we had to learn about our own styles and what we want to see from a leader. And I couldn't help but think of Star Wars. I mean, some of the best characters and the best examples of the types of things we went over in these leadership workshops, I easily identify in characters I wholly respect in Star Wars itself. And so in Star Wars, it's more obvious. There's good versus evil. One is trying to triumph over the other. And how do they get it done? With great leadership. And I want to ask you this question to start this entire thing off. Who would you follow into battle in Star Wars? Who comes to your mind first?
Honestly, Obi-Wan comes to mind first.
Right.
Followed closely by Leia.
Exactly. Same.
Yeah.
There's
of course.
there's a theme. And in fact, I asked this question on Twitter, and of the replies I got, Leia was the most commonly referenced leader. Okay. And I actually want to break it down into the original trilogy, the Clone Wars, and then everything else. Sequels and Mandalorian and what's the other one? Rebels. God. Because male, female, alien, non-alien, there's all these perfect archetypes, right? In Star Wars that you would trust and follow. And Leia is the top of the top, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And even from a young age.
Right. Even when, you don't need a workshop to know that I trust that woman and I would follow her forward into whatever she, wanted me to. And
yeah,
it's interesting because they all kind of exude the same qualities. And I think on a much larger scale, what I want to get from this episode and our conversation between ourselves is how can we be like these people? Right? Because I've always said, I am Leia, but I aspire to be Luke.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you look up to a certain character and you want to emulate those characteristics of said character. And it's like, why do we even think of them? So that's what I thought we could talk about. And I guess I'll drive this episode just based on the fact that I've been to a few dozen workshops for work.
Well, I mean, you know that because of these workshops, you have an understanding of leadership style, and I know nothing about it. My knowledge on leadership is all intuitive. I have no formal training in it at all. So yeah, when you ask me who would I follow into battle, Obi-Wan, because I trust him.
Yes.
And I don't think he would risk my life needlessly.
Right.
Leia, because kind of the same thing. But both of them would be willing to ask you to sacrifice a lot, which
Correct. Yes.
yeah.
So what's interesting is those are all the traits of a great leader. And I'm glad you explained why, because I know why I would follow Obi-Wan. For the same reasons you said. He's someone he's not going to endanger us, and if he did, he's going in with us. Remember the
Right.
landing at Point Rain?
Yes.
He was injured, but he wasn't going to let his whole squadron go without him joining him. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
what is it? The commander goes down with the ship? I mean, that's,
Right.
I mean, we're all in this together type mentality.
Right.
And there's always the comparison of what's the difference between a leader and a manager, right? The manager sends people out to do things. A leader is with the people that go out and do the
Pong Krell?
thing. Yes! Pong Krell! So there's the leaders on that edge, on that side of things, and I also have that in the thing. Palpatine and Vader were leaders. Okay?
Yeah. Yes. Effective leaders. If you want to
Effective
look
leaders.
at it that way.
And I hate to bring this up, but historical figures that weren't so great. Think of whoever you can. There's a whole list of historical figures that were horrible, terrible people, but they were able to join a large group of people together to accomplish something through persuasion, through good communication skills, to uniting them, organizing them, you know, kind of brainwashing them. Who does that sound like?
Palpatine.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about being a good leader, are you talking about morality or are you talking about effectiveness? Like you could use it for bad as well.
Well, Palpatine was effective, right? He got anyone under him to do what he wanted them to do. So he was an effective leader, but not someone people voluntarily wanted to follow. They did not want to follow him. They followed him out of fear. It goes back to from a certain point of view. What's his name? He needed that fear.
Piet?
Yeah,
Yes.
Piet. He needed that fear in order to continue to follow the orders and feel like he was somebody. That's not a good leader. It's an effective leader, but it's not someone you would want to follow. Leia, Luke, Obi-Wan. Those are people you want to follow. And that's the key to being an excellent, good leader. People are still following you. You're still getting things done, but it's because you've bonded with them, they trust you, and they want to do the things for you.
Well, I mean, if you've ever had a boss that treated you with respect and understanding, when they come back around and they ask you, can you work an extra shift? You'll be like, yeah, I could do that for you because when I need something, I know you're going to be there for me. It's a reciprocal. It's really how you build loyalty is respecting the people that you manage or are in charge of.
So let's talk about the original trilogy individuals. And we start with Leia because she's the top of the top, right? And we saw in the Kenobi series that it was already starting with her. Right? You could already see the budding senator to come, the budding general to follow. And she met people where they were. She never thought she was higher than anyone else. You know, how many times did Han call her princess? And she was just like, leave that out of it. You know, it was just not even part of her equation. And there's qualities of a leader that make you want to follow them. And Leia really exemplifies the ability to inspire. She inspired so many, even from a young age. Communication, she was always very clear. When she's giving those briefings, people listened. She had an audience. They wanted to hear what she had to say. They trusted her. She came with a sense of humor. She had confidence and she was committed. Never wavered. And who does that make you also think of? Mon Mothma.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
Right? She had a more quiet sense about her, but she had the same thing. She inspired. She delegated. She was committed. She had the attitude. She was honest. She had the best interest of her group in mind. She had to make the hard decisions. that nobody else wanted to do, but they looked to her to make because they trusted her. So it's these same qualities over and over and over. I'm probably going to sound like a broken record.
Well, it's interesting while you're saying this, I'm thinking of Luthen also, because so the thing that makes him a little bit like, I wouldn't put my life in his hands, because we've seen the way he communicates with, I cannot remember the character's name, who is in his shop with him all the time, his shopkeeper,
Oh, yes.
whatever,
Yeah.
whatever her name is. And she is willing to cut off their lines, right? Cut their losses and pull back without any explanation to the person they're cutting out.
That's very true.
They put a hit on people. You know, they literally are willing to kill off people. And so joining his team, I would never be sure I was safe.
Right.
It kind of reminds me of like, this is coming to mind because I just watched it. The Dark Knight at the beginning, the Joker puts a team together and he assigns each person on the team to kill another team member. So by the end, he's the only one standing.
Right.
And it's like, that's kind of how I feel with Luthen. It's like, as long as you're fighting for the same cause as him, on the same page as him, you're fine. But if you ever start to think outside the box, I feel like you might not be part of the team anymore. You'd be expendable. I mean, they even say that Cassian's expendable when they put him on the team.
Well, that's why I would rather follow Cassian than Luthen. Cassian is more real. He's more down to earth, kind of, he came from it and thus he knows it. You know, you start at the bottom and work your way up. And it's those moments when they're on Aldhani where he ends up being the leader of this group that he was just thrust into.
Yeah. Yes. He steps up when other people kind of start to falter.
Yes. And it's because he's giving them the truth. He's not sugarcoating anything. And he's also not going to pull any strings and say, look, this is how it is and this is how we got to be to go into this. Either you're with me or you're not. Like, you guys need to get your minds right. Because he had the best interest of the group because he didn't want to die either.
Right, right.
And they ended up trusting him. And I think it's an excellent point to make where you don't even have to be the top of the top. Anyone can be a leader. Anyone. You don't have to be the captain of a ship. You don't have to be a Jedi. You don't have to be part of this. You could be the new person in a group and you just have that charisma and the forthrightness of just being honest and truthful about things. And people are going to turn to you and look to you. And that's what I think separates a good leader from, let's say, the effective leadership style that Palpatine had. He ruled by fear.
You couldn't bring your issues to Palpatine.
No,
for sure.
Please. Even Vader couldn't bring his issues to Palpatine. It was used against him.
Can you imagine? Like, everyone's afraid of Vader.
Yeah.
But Vader is also playing Palpatine's game at the same time.
Yes.
Which in the comics, Palpatine keeps challenging him in the comics, like trying to replace him, and Vader just always manages to step up and achieve whatever insane thing the Emperor wants. I just can't imagine living under that kind of stress. You know, he'll put you in an early grave if you had a boss like that in real life.
Honest to God, like the stress that everyone is under in the Empire. Well, we see it in Andor. We see it in Rogue One. Krennic was sweating almost every scene.
So true. Oh my God. Tarkin and Krennic scenes, I love them. I could honestly watch them over and over because they're both just such, they're like, it's like watching two type A people go at it. Or, you know, it's just like, oh, the headbutting is amazing.
But I mean, does anyone want to follow that? No.
Some people thrive in it, but I don't. I sure
no.
don't.
If you do, then you're made of the same thing that the leader is, because you have to see eye to eye with somebody, right?
Right.
If the fear isn't great enough to keep you there, then there's also something you share in common with that person, so you at least understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What a great point. And very true. That's why the Empire's so
right? And then there's Finn, who was part of the Empire. But but didn't have the qualities, the morality, he didn't see, he didn't understand. He was following orders, and he defected and became a much more effective leader in his people, his group of people. He was more accepted because he had the same goals, the same dream, the same wants as Leia, who was leading them essentially, and then Poe. And Poe's another one I want to talk about. Poe becomes the leader after Leia, essentially, with Finn, which I think no one person can replace Leia. It has to be two people. Yeah.
Yes.
But he's an effective leader and a good leader because he comes with that sense of humor. He comes with that realness. He knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
He knows strategy. He knows ships. He's not afraid to take chances, and he gains the trust of individuals. And I would follow Poe because I don't think that he would jeopardize anybody. He would sacrifice himself first before his droid. Okay?
Yes. Aw.
You know, he thinks about everyone, and I'm going to leave everything from The Last Jedi out of this conversation. It deviates from his character far too much for my liking. But
yeah,
Poe he's an extremely good leader, I think. And he also worked his way up. He was also kind of under Leia's wing when his parents died, so he was learning from the best.
Mm-hmm.
And Leia's like that pinnacle. She's everything, all in one.
Well, and I kind of want to focus on how, is that because of Bail and Brea? So in the Kenobi series, we see how Bail talks to Leia with respect, even though she's a child. And something I loved about this show is that sometimes they have conflict with parents, right?
Yeah.
And Brea was kind of disapproving.
Yeah.
And I was expecting contention. There's not. She was actually a very understanding mother. She wasn't frustrated that her daughter was behaving a certain way.
Yeah.
She just needed her to have certain manners under certain circumstances, but really respected her wanting to be an independent spirit. And I think all of that leads to Leia being so grounded when she's an adult and confident.
Yes.
And compassionate. And all these things make a great leader. So I just liked seeing that in the Kenobi series.
Well, the trait is what I think they did, Brea and Bail. They allowed Leia to be Leia, and they allowed her strengths to come out, right? They fostered what was good about her. And an excellent leader wants to make sure that they utilize everyone's specific talents. They may not be the best at flying a ship, but they might be the best at communicating over the lines to those who are flying the ship, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to build them up in their area so that they can become their greatest version of themselves. And it takes a really smart, empathetic, in-tune person to know people, to sense they're not happy, they are happy. You know, you got to kind of read a room, and not everyone's really good at that. But
yeah,
it seems like Leia was placed in a lot of rooms since a very young age where she observed people. You know, she handled that, what was it, the cousin at the table, you know?
Mm-hmm. I wish I could be that way.
Right? And she called Obi-Wan out because she could sense what he was going through, what he was feeling without even asking him.
Yeah.
You know, you could say the Force. Maybe she was in tune with the Force and could feel it. Maybe not.
Doesn't matter either way. She used that skill and that feeling or observation to positively, empower the people around her. And I think that Obi-Wan does that as well.
Obi-Wan's... If I were to read you, let me just read you, quote, the qualities of leadership. Now, this is not limited to, but this is just a few. Let's all think of Obi-Wan while we listen to these qualities. Honesty, efficient communication, knowledge, consistency, a visionary, selflessness, courage, and willpower. Those are just a few.
Check, 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 check,
Check, check, check, check, check, check, check. And for Leia, too. And I would like to add Luke Skywalker. Courage, selflessness, consistently all over the place. God bless him. He he was honest. He didn't hesitate in telling Yoda, hey, man, I got to go because my friends are in trouble. You know?
Yeah.
He felt a certain way and went for it. And you know, he learned from his missteps and became a much better communicator. But he always did the exact same thing. If you were in trouble, Luke was there. We saw it in The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Essentially Boba Fett as well, I guess. He met Grogu where he was. He didn't pretend to be, you know, above him in any way just because one was young and he was much older, you know.
Yeah.
Grogu trusted him and he had no reason to. But he felt through the Force, this is a good guy, you know.
Right.
He's somebody I would follow.
Oh, absolutely. I would always follow Luke. With Luke, what you see is what you get. You know, I think that is also a sign of a good leader. When you're noticing, like, I think in a work environment, right? If your boss is different with you than they are with any other people, you start to wonder, you know, are they playing you to get you to... It's... When you start to wonder about people's motivations, it starts to make you less loyal and a little more distrusting. Is distrusting a word?
Yeah. Well,
Untrusting?
you mistrust some, right? Distrust? Mistrust?
I don't know.
You just don't trust them.
You don't trust them. And with Obi-Wan, I feel like I would trust him to not be like using me the way, you know, like Pong Krell is using his people like pawns.
Yeah.
But I like in Revenge of the Sith when they start to ask Obi-Wan to ask Anakin to start spying on the Emperor. It's like you see how uncomfortable Obi-Wan is with it. He does it, but he really doesn't like it.
Yeah.
And it's because it's counterintuitive to the way he leads. You know, he still does it because he's a subordinate, but I'm glad that they showed that moment where he says the council is asking you. You can tell he hates to even say it out loud in that scene.
Right. It goes against what he's already established with Anakin, which is it's already difficult between them because there's a lack of trust on Anakin's side only because he's got Palpatine in the other ear, you know?
Yeah.
And Obi-Wan doesn't want to do anything to further distance themselves. And he needs to maintain that trust in order to have Anakin's full buy-in. You got to have buy-in for the people around you in order to lead them. And the more doubt that creeps into Anakin's mind, the more distant they become, and then Anakin's able to completely disconnect from Obi-Wan. And it was not anything that Obi-Wan was doing.
Well, and we've talked about like the events like leading up to Revenge of the Sith basically is like cutting off all of Obi-Wan's lines of retreat when it comes to like thinking for yourself a little bit. You know, it's like Satine and then Ahsoka and now the Council, and it's kind of like the more opportunity he has to say, you know, this isn't right, we shouldn't do this, and he doesn't take that opportunity, he becomes less and less able to do that. So by the time Revenge of the Sith comes around, it's almost like he has lost his own compass at that point. And so I think it's understandable why he doesn't stand up for Anakin, because he's like so in the mix, right? And he's probably just trying to do the right thing, and the right thing is what he knows, you know, the council and the code, and because there's been so much turmoil in his life, especially recently,
right?
You know, but how different could things have been if he finally put his foot down? I was just like, this isn't right. I'm not going to ask my best friend to do this. You know,
I don't know where that would have gone. That's a good question. What if he had put his foot down? Would they have listened to him, or would they just kicked him off the council?
Yeah, I mean, for all we know, it would have isolated them, Anakin and Obi-Wan, together as outsiders then.
Yeah. That's an interesting, I never thought of that. What would have happened if Obi-Wan would have put his foot down? Huh.
A new episode coming sometime. Yeah. We just have all the instances where he could have put his foot down but didn't.
That is the title of the next episode or future episode. Yeah. All the times he could have put his foot down and didn't. God. Okay, so let me ask you this question. This is not a trick question. Just your honest answer.
Okay.
Would you follow Anakin?
No.
Why?
The reason especially comes in Point Rain. So as Point Rain is the reason I would follow Obi-Wan, it's the exact reason I wouldn't follow Anakin.
Yes.
And to see him on the battlefield with Ahsoka, bickering and fighting,
Yes.
even if it's funny, makes me feel like, and you can see Rex looking at them while they're doing it. It's kind of like, could we focus here, folks?
Well, I think Luminara even said that, right?
Yes, she did. And as a consumer watching the show, I loved it. If I was his soldier, I'd be like, dude, like, can we please get serious for a minute?
Like, can we get some guidance here? Which I think he grows into a little more because Rex surely does trust him and those 501st follow him. But I would also hesitate because of what we know. He's not organized. He often looks to Obi-Wan, as he's still in, if you're thinking of like seasons 1 through 3, maybe, he's still kind of leaning on Obi-Wan for answers and stuff. But he's also supposed to be teaching Ahsoka. And one of the things is lead by example. And Ahsoka picked up a little bit of it, the good and the bad.
Yeah. But
he's still a little too inconsistent for me to be like, Obi-Wan,
Yeah.
And that's comforting, especially if you're running into a highly volatile situation. I want somebody like Obi-Wan who's cool and has a plan and follows it and is going to, make sure everyone knows what they're doing, where they're going, etc. And Anakin's just kind of like, let's go,
Yeah. And it's one thing for him to risk himself and be courageous. It's another thing for you to risk the lives of other people depending on you. And I think Anakin kind of learns as Ahsoka makes mistakes.
Yes.
I feel like we see when she leads her squadron in and they all get killed.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another example and this is when she's very young. And there's the other time where, is it Holocron heist when Cad Bane, she goes running after Cad Bane and he takes her hostage. Mm-hmm. And Anakin is shouting, Ahsoka, it's a trap, but the door's closed before. And it's like exactly what Obi-Wan has been shouting at Anakin. Anakin, no!
Yep.
It's like every parent's blessing / curse that they hope their children has a child just like them.
Yep.
It's like, that's how, and as, that's probably season 1, season 2. And as they get into the deeper seasons, you start to see Anakin's leadership mature and Ahsoka's leadership mature as well. Mm-hmm. And I definitely would not feel safe with a leader who's kind of getting their legs under them. You know, it's like, I want your legs under you before you start leading me anywhere.
Right.
I don't want you to be learning on the job if my life is in danger. So I think Anakin is an effective leader, especially later, but in the earlier seasons, I would not want to be assigned to him. I'd be quite nervous, actually.
It points to, in fact, his growth points to Obi-Wan's style of leadership. He made it a safe place. He promoted Anakin's failures to like, look, you can learn from this. Just keep going, keep trying, etc. And I think him with Ahsoka, meaning Anakin and Ahsoka, they kind of grew up together at different stages. They were both very young, but Anakin was older than her, of course. But
yeah, they were.
They were both kind of making their way and learning together, which is, they were both under Obi-Wan. And you always see, we said in a previous episode, Ahsoka turned to Obi-Wan more than she did Anakin, because he was able to he had like a quiet inspiration, I would say. You know, Anakin's a loud inspiration. Inspire what? I'm not sure. Fill in the blank. But Obi-Wan had that trust established and was able to communicate with Ahsoka in a way that she felt safe to ask questions. She felt safe to make mistakes. And that, I think, is a reflection of where she ends up. We just talked about this in the Obi-Wan and Ahsoka episode.
Yeah.
All of that led to Ahsoka maturing in a way that Anakin never could, because Anakin was kind of still very egocentric, and you got to let go of that in order to be a really good leader. Otherwise, then you end up ruling with fear, because the ego is a whole other episode. That's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, does he even stand a chance? Because are you born with ego? I mean, I'm sure ego is probably something that's more learned socially as you grow. But once you have like a really strong ego, it takes something really humiliating, I think, generally to break you of that. So, I mean, it's very hard to remove a strong ego. And I mean ego in sense of like pride, not in sense of like the id versus the, you know.
Right. And that, I think that's essentially Anakin's problem, right? Because have you ever heard of the servant leader?
Mm-mm.
It's a way of being a servant to the others in your group that makes you a good leader. You serve them in whatever way possible. And I don't know that Anakin ever served anyone other than his own fears.
That's a really interesting point. We know that he cares about Rex and Ahsoka and Obi-Wan.
And he's honest with them. He communicates to them.
Yeah.
But his bottom line was always making sure he didn't lose anybody. And that's very selfish. There's a way you don't want to have losses in war.
Of course, yeah.
But if you think of the way that Obi-Wan and Anakin handle that, there's a huge difference.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's so interesting to think about. And you were saying earlier that Anakin is like loud and Obi-Wan is quiet, and it made me think of Attack of the Clones. There's the scene where this is so great because it's the scene where they're protecting Padme at night, and Obi-Wan like jumps through the window.
Yes.
And Anakin, but like there's this whole sequence right after that of Anakin gets a speeder and Obi-Wan's like always on the move or whatever the it is. He's irritated by Anakin acting really brash and jumping off the speeder and doing all this crazy shit. They both end up at the same place at the same time, even though one was chaotic and one took his time.
Yes.
And then ultimately, Obi-Wan is the one who very calmly has a drink at the bar and foils the assassin attempt, you know, at the same time.
It's all this wasted energy on Anakin's part.
Yes, exactly. It's like they reach the same point, but Obi-Wan has learned that you don't have to expend all this energy, emotional and physical.
Yes.
To get to the end point. And I think that is where you are a much more effective leader, because not only do you preserve your own energy, you can help your unit preserve its energy as well. And I think Anakin has a lot of trouble. He wants to just run in all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't hate him for that. He wants to save people. He wants to do good.
Right. It comes from a good place.
Yes. But the manner in which it's played out often has a few missteps here and there. I really think he shines in the Kadavo arc because it's on him to make sure all of them come together. The thing is taken care of. And he's battling his own personal feelings about, you know, slavery and all this stuff. So
Mirage really forces him to kind of look at that selflessness, quote unquote. And she's offering him, you know, I will set your friends free. You just have to agree to be my slave. And it's like it makes this paradox in his mind that he cannot accept either, you know?
Right.
It was just, but then he does ultimately, I mean, I was going to say he finds a way, but maybe he, like if Dooku had never shown up, who knows how that would have played out.
Right, true.
But it's interesting that arc is so interesting because it's such a challenge to him.
Yeah.
But he does shine the whole time.
Yeah, and
But he also, that's where when we say we want to do like a red flag episode, like
Yeah,
he's got
yeah,
so many red flags in that episode.
God bless him. He had all the makings,
Yeah.
of what, Luke becomes what Anakin could have been if Anakin would have just shoved Anakin down. You know what I mean? Be more Luke is the t-shirt I would make in this instance. Just be more Luke. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the quiet leaders, which are, I categorize as Padme and Hera.
Oh, yeah.
Two totally different women, okay? Two totally different positions. But I would follow both of them because they, especially Hera, because Hera's kind of in the action a little more. And this is not a discredit to Padme. She just different time, different position. Hera's in the mud with her people. Mm-hmm. And they follow her. They trust her. She makes hard decisions. And timely decisions. If she's, in the ship and she has to do something, she's asking people, we got to get in there. We got to make it, this, that, and the other thing. She knows that there's risk and she pushes forward anyway, but not at the potential of hurting anyone in her family, the ghost crew, right?
Yeah.
And they respect her for it. And she goes on to lead larger groups and become more involved in the rebellion, and she makes it all the way to the end. And she has that skill, and I don't know where it comes from, of just the right amount of street smarts and just the right amount of empathy to make her deadly and dangerous, but a good leader. Like, she's a dangerous, I almost said human. She's a dangerous woman because she's got heart and mind and soul all working at the same time in like this delicate balance that allows everyone to respect her, to follow her, to never question her. She's like the top up there with Leia to me.
She has this, I don't know if you've seen the Bad Batch episodes that show her as a child.
Not yet. Sorry, everyone.
They're interesting because you kind of start to see that making there. Her parents are people of power on Ryloth, but the Empire's there. And so she's watching this injustice. And she has an uncle who's like kind of part of the underground. They're doing like arms runs where they try and like, buy weapons to arm their rebels still while the Empire's there. And she starts to see consequences of those decisions and how they can affect her family and how they can affect her population as a whole. And it's really cool to see how what we've said in the past, are you going to let it break you or are you going to let it make you stronger?
Absolutely.
And she comes away so much stronger. She's such a great character. God, I love Hera so much.
She and Padme share the teamwork aspect because I don't think Padme ever did anything selfishly.
I don't know if she was possible, like capable.
Even from a young age. Again, from a young age. These individuals, they're fully competent. They have the trust of people. They're effective communicators. They everyone around them knows what they need to do and will follow the orders or instructions of their leader, right? And they motivate. Yeah. They inspire. Padme inspired Ahsoka so much.
Yeah.
And Hera inspired everyone, including Chopper. And he's a little hellion that won't listen to anybody. He is his own person, okay? He is his own droid.
He'll listen to her. He'll listen to her.
Why? Trust, right?
Mm-hmm. And he understands her motivations.
Isn't that it? Padme's motivation was the same as Hera's, is the same as Leia's, is the same as Mon Mothma. I know they're all female, but I'm going somewhere with this. The same as Luke, the same as Obi-Wan, is to make sure the people around them, they had a job to do. They had trust in the people that were around them, and they had to make decisions to get the job done with as little loss as possible. If they could inspire someone on the way, bonus.
Yeah.
Which how wouldn't you inspire someone by doing all those other things, having trust in large amounts of people, fighting for what's right? Your intentions are centered in a good, wholesome, they're just trying to do things. They're trying to give the rights to the clones. They're trying to have these poor people on the poor civilizations on planets that are being just wiped out by the Empire. All these things, all the discrimination. They're fighting for basic human rights or alien rights. It's so hard. Yeah, just the rights of the Commonwealth, I'll say. And they're motivating others to do the same. Mon Mothma motivated how many people leading what she needed to do, and I don't even think we've seen the whole of it yet. We're getting that in Andor.
Oh, I know.
You know what I mean?
know. I wonder what is gonna be that final
breakthrough
catalyst,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
where she becomes the Mon Mothma that everyone follows and reveres.
I suspect it's gonna be like a Phoenix moment where like her life gets burned to the ground and she comes back like stronger. But
every single one of these people have climbed out of the darkness and have gone on to do great things and inspire others to do great things. And if I could do that in my life just once, cool. Clock's ticking. But, I have so many people on this list and we don't have the time. But who are your like top leaders and that you would follow? The ones that
in
you would
Star Wars?
Yeah, wholesale in Star Wars.
Honestly, it would be Leia and Obi-Wan for sure. But then I would follow Jyn Erso.
I didn't even.
Holy shit.
Can we talk about Jyn?
Yes.
Jyn, my God. Okay, she has that. She was so unsure of herself. I have to get my life together in order to talk about it. Maybe you should talk about her because you're the Jyn expert here. You're the Jynologist. I don't think she thought she could be a leader until she became one.
Yes. I think that's accurate.
She was in prison for how many years? And she went on to lead the very first, like, what is it? Like the first everything that started the downfall of the Empire.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost like a pirate crew, right, that decided to trust her. It was basically like the trust that she established with Cassian, Chirrut, Baze, Bodhi, K2 even.
Every single one of them.
Yeah, like to instill trust, even accidentally, just by incidentally, I'll say, because of the way she is under pressure and the way she doesn't even know her own value. And I think that's why she's so good, because she doesn't see her own value, but Cassian does.
Yeah, and that's what makes him so good.
Exactly. Like he's what you mentioned earlier, seeing other people's strengths and allowing them to use their strengths. And they talk about it a little bit more in the novelization, that he sees this thing like burning in her and she's like, don't come to me for absolution. Like, I can't do that for you. Mm-hmm. And it's not that. He needs someone to follow because he does need absolution because he's done terrible things. But what he really wants to do is finally do something that's actually good, that's going to do some good. Mm-hmm. And she's the fire that can, she's the spark that starts the fire,
Yes.
In the people that he brings with on the Scarif, mission. Yeah. It's like all those people are there because they know her intention. Again, the real reason she wants to go, it's not glory. It's not, self-righteous. It's because if we don't stop it, everyone else suffers. And it doesn't really matter what I need, at this point.
Yeah.
And I think she had kind of seen the futility by this point, like that meeting where they're all there and everyone's like, we're just going to surrender.
Yep.
And she's already seen the blood on the ground, from what not just the Death Star, what it can do, but also watching her father die and watching Chirrut and Baze lose and Bodhi for that matter. He's from Jeddah also. Like, I think it's pretty amazing that a person that now has like nothing left to lose steps up and decides to do something for the greater good, as opposed to cowering away and slinking off to some part of the galaxy where maybe I can live a few more years before the Empire catches up to me, kind of thing.
She already tried that and it didn't work. She's been on the other side. She already knows what doesn't work. So she has that knowledge that, we're in a position where we act or we die. And unfortunately, they did both. But in doing so, they inspired so many others. It was not in vain.
Yeah.
But Jin is one of a... Ooh, I would follow her. I would follow her hands down. Hands down.
And I think by that time, there's a line in the book, which I think is kind of interesting, that I think they cut out of the movie. It's when they're on the little... I don't know, it's like a conveyor belt that takes them from the landing pad into the Citadel.
Yeah.
And in there, she's acting all antsy, and Cassian's like, "What's wrong with you? Like, what is it?" And she says something like she's afraid of how she's going to be once she becomes afraid in the Citadel. Like, once enough pressure is put on her in the past, she would have run. And Cassian's like, "You're going to do fine. Like, just relax. You'll be fine." And I like that about her character, because she's realizing she doesn't have to be that anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's the kind of moment where it's like, man, I wish I could be that strong and find that strength in myself. So yeah, I love her so much.
I just wish I could take like a handful of traits from all of these amazing characters.
Yeah.
And like even do just one of them a day. But we all have the ability to do that. Because if Jin can come from where she came from, or Leia can come where she came from, Obi-Wan, name any of the people we talked about, except for Palpatine. He's just an authoritative or Ponkrell. Leave him out of this. He's not even allowed in this conversation.
We should do an episode about the opposite side of this. Like,
well, let's do it.
Yeah, because
the authoritarian bosses versus leaders. There's leaders, and then there's bosses, managers, dictators,
Star Wars managers.
Yeah, in the great office of the galaxy.
I was gonna say it's like Office Space. Hey, Vader, what's happening?
What's happening? I'm going to need you to get a starship this Saturday.
We're putting a cover on the PTS reports or whatever the hell that is.
TPS. The TPS reports.
Thank you.
Who would be Milton with the stapler? Have you seen my stapler? I'm sorry. I politely requested to listen to my radio at a respectable volume.
Krennic. Krennic is basic. He's like saying, "It's my Death Star, and they just keep telling him to put his desk in the basement.
Okay, we're going to end this episode with a preview of what Star Wars bosses look like, and it's coming up next time. In the future, we'll cover Star Wars bosses, and we'll do it in the form of Office Space. If you haven't seen the movie, we're sorry.
Yeah, it's a good one.
The whole movie is a meme.
It is.
Our question to you this week is pretty obvious. If you were to follow anyone and make them your leader in Star Wars, who would it be? And why?
Join us next week. We are going to do some more Obi-Wan, because we really could never get enough Obi-Wan on this show.
Not on this show.
Nope. We're going to talk about the Mustafar duel from Revenge of the Sith. We're going to analyze it, break it down, gush about it, cry about it, I'm sure. And then as like a second part to that, in the following episode, we're going to talk about the Kenobi duel. So join us back here next week to talk about Mustafar.
Thank you so much for joining us here on the Most Things Kenobi podcast. We appreciate every single one of our patrons and are grateful for your support. If you'd like to support the podcast and become a patron as well, head over to the Most Things Kenobi Patreon. As always, you can follow us on Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. If you enjoy our podcast, feel free to rate us on Spotify and Apple. And if you need just one place to find all of these, head over to mostthinkskenobi.com.
So until next time, my space twin, may the force be with you.
Always.